You might have heard of that one verse in the Bible that talks about how the same power that rose Jesus from the dead lives inside of us. You know, if that's true, if we have the power of God inside of us, why do we feel so weak against sin? Why do we feel like no matter how hard we try, we will never be able to overcome the temptation when it comes? Every Christian can probably relate to, trying their absolute hardest to not give into sin, to, promising that this will be the last time, only to go back to the sin a couple days later. Every Christian knows how weak they truly are. And every Christian can probably relate to that verse in the Bible that talks about how their spirit is willing, but their flesh is weak. Their spirit wants to stop sinning. Their spirit knows of the benefits of being without sin, but their flesh is weak, and the flesh enjoys sin too much. I want to give you this analogy that helped me to understand what it means to be strengthened by God, and what it means to be strengthened by God even though we are weak. So there's this story of this man, this fully grown man, who's going surfing. And as he's going surfing, he's kind of not very experienced at surfing. He's gone maybe a couple times before, but he doesn't really know how to surf. And as he's paddling out into the deeper and the deeper water, he comes across this young child who appears to be drowning, like he doesn't know how to swim. And so the man, naturally, he goes toward the child, thinking that he's going to save him. But right before he reaches the child, he has this thought, and he realizes, if I try to save that child, he's going to grab onto me, and he's just going to pull me under as well. The man thinks, that child doesn't know how to swim, and I could try rescue him, but since I'm pretty unco with a surfboard, and I'm not very good at swimming myself, he's just going to pull me under, and both of us are going to drown. In that situation, that young child who is going to die, that young child who's going to drown, in that situation, the child had the power to drown a fully grown man. He had the power to kill the man, even though the child would have been a third of his size. The man was a fully grown adult, but the child was just small and weak. And the reason that he had this power, the reason that he had the ability to drown the fully grown man, is because of his weakness. It's because of the fact that if the man paddled toward him and tried to save him, the child would grab onto the man with his life, with desperation, knowing that that's the only way that he might be able to survive. And that's what gives him the power to be able to drown the other person, knowing that how weak he is. His power came from how desperately helpless he was, and how he would desperately grab onto the man with his life, knowing that there's no other way, knowing that he would die, that he's gonna die if he doesn't. This is kind of what it's like when we ask God for strength. The only way that we can have power and strength to overcome sin is if we grasp onto God with our life, and we stop trying to use our own strength and our own discipline and self-control, but rather we rely on God and use His strength. We grasp onto God with all of our life, knowing that we're going to die otherwise. There's this interesting fact about Paul the Apostle that I learned recently. And Paul was this guy who wrote most of the New Testament. He wrote these letters to all the people and a bunch of the churches that were around when he was alive. And in the Bible, the letters aren't actually ordered in the order that they were written. They're not in the chronological order, but they're ordered, I think they're ordered from the longest book to the shortest. But you can actually discover something really interesting if you order his letters in chronological order, from the first letter that he wrote to the last letter that he wrote. And something interesting that you notice about Paul is the way that he refers to himself changes. In his first couple letters, he calls himself an apostle chosen by God. I don't know the exact words, but in his first couple letters, he refers to himself as an apostle. And, a bit later on, he refers to himself as a servant of Christ. And then later on, he refers to himself as the least among the apostles, the least among the servants of Christ. And then right as he gets to the end of his life, as he's writing his last letters, he calls himself the least among sinners. That's the development of Paul's self-image, of what he thinks about himself. And what this shows, it shows that as Paul matured as a Christian, as he grew in his walk with Christ, he didn't become less of a sinner, but he actually became more aware of how much of a sinner he was. And that's true about all Christians. As you mature as a Christian, it doesn't mean that you sin less. It just means that you become more aware of how much of a sinner you are and how weak you are without God. Christianity, maturing as a Christian, isn't about sinning less and coming to a point in your life where you just don't sin at all, because that's impossible. We're humans, right? As long as we are in this flesh, we are going to sin. But maturing as a Christian means realizing how much of a sinner you are and how much you desperately rely on God's strength and God's grace. I'm going to leave you with this quote, and I apologize because I forgot who said the quote, but it goes like this: "The only thing that you have contributed to your salvation is your sin that makes your salvation necessary." Yeah, I hope this helps. If you found this valuable in any way, please subscribe, write a comment or something, because I do genuinely appreciate those. But yeah, otherwise, bro, God bless.